getting us underway. You could say that about the Freak Zone, I guess, couldn't you? And it's getting us underway on the Freak Zone for tonight. I'm Stuart Maconie. Tonight we've got the usual smorgasbord of excellent left field tunes and something of an extra special treat. Donovan's gorgeous 1967 recording, a double album, first box set, some would say, A Gift from a Flower to a Garden, is being reissued in a lavish deluxe set at the beginning of December. It's one of my favourite albums. I really love it. It's my favourite Donovan album and one of my favourite albums kind of by anyone. So we've taken this opportunity to have it as our featured album, and Donovan himself will be joining me to give his thoughts about some of the tracks that we're playing. As I said, Donovan's Gift from a Flower to a Garden from 1967 is being reissued in a month or so's time in a very handsome new edition, and I was delighted to catch up with Donovan to talk about it.
I'm delighted it is that the special album that you've chosen, there's nothing like it, and there hasn't been anything since. It's a curious machine that I've put together. It's one that parents can actually enjoy one album and their children the other. So it's a kind of a parent-child experience. And I had a lot of fun doing it.
Am I right in thinking it's the first ever pop or rock box set? I think it is.
That's how it seems to have worked out. It was quite unusual, me sitting with the designer, Sidney Mora, in New York, and Clive Davis, who had just taken over Epic Records in the Columbia building, and we spread out what I wanted to do. Sid being an artist, graphic designer, Sid Mora, he grew up with the Warhol and the graphic companies in those days before I met him. And then we laid it all out. Clive Davis looked at it and said, a box? Pop stars don't get boxes. Jazz gets boxes. Classical gets boxes. Now and again, folk gets boxes. What are you up to? I said, look, this is how it is. We want to do fine art everything. You know, usually, Stuart, in the early days, and maybe even now, two pieces of cardboard were put together to make a vinyl the cheapest way possible. 5 or 4 guys dressed in the same suits jumped up and down on a roof to get photographs, and that was the packaging. The packaging was made because the guys who were taking over the record companies used to sell furniture and cars, and so they really were trying to do it the cheapest possible. And when Clive Davis looked at me and looked at Sid, and we already had hit records, me and Clive Davis, and he said, okay, I get what you want to do, but we'll have to take the costs out of your royalties. And I said, no problem, Clive, let's do this. So what it was to give a piece of work to my incredible fans who had supported me already into the charts and all over the world in concerts. I wanted to give something, Stuart, that was a kind of an heirloom, and maybe for the first time, a parent could share something with their child. In my generation, usually in my generation, the parents had a kind of their music and the kids had theirs.
Yeah. And it is, and now with this deluxe new set, it's a beautiful thing. It remains a beautiful artifact, if I can use that word.
Yes, it is. And it is an heirloom. Fans do come up when I last toured in America or Europe, and they have one. And it's a little bit tatty, but would I sign it? It's a very collectible item and very beautiful. And of course, there's only 500 being made, but all the music is available, of course, on a CD and on the internet. But it is a piece of work. When I sat down with the illustrators, I took a great interest in illustrating my work from a very first cover because I felt that the fans needed it and the work needed it. And when I sat down with the illustrators and we started talking, it was going to be quite a difficult thing to find the paper, to 7-color illustrations, handmade box. It was a beautiful thing even then. It really is something special and something to pass on. I guess now you could say grandparents and grandkids.
Yes, yeah. Let's talk about the first two tracks that we're going to play then. Maybe let's take the second one first that we're going to hear, which is Voyage into the Golden Screen. Anything you remember about this tune?
Well, it's a kind of a mystical, visionary song. It speaks of that extraordinary feeling of being in deep nature, and all of the books I was reading of mysticism, and of course about the magic of the Gaelic Celtic past, and it all is in there. But the guitar picking is particularly something that I developed without even thinking. And the guitar is like my orchestra on that particular track. And on that track, it's part of the children's album on this box set. It is very much, if you're a young parent and you've got a kid, and it's one of those babies maybe that finds it difficult to nod off to sleep, play this track. That child will be off to Nodland very easily.
And before that, though, we're going to play the first track on the album, gorgeous track, Where You Love Like Heaven. Tell us about this, Donovan.
Well, most of my generation and the generation just above me, we were thinking we were going to art school. We were artists, we were painters, we wanted to hang out in art school. Art school was more interesting, the girls were more interesting, the teachers were bohemians and they had all the books, and it was a fascinating location to actually be. But we put down the guitar, the songwriters I'm talking about, and picked up the paintbrush, and then wondered whether this was the way we really wanted to go. And so when I put down the guitar, like John Lennon, and started writing songs, inside the songs were all the painter aspects that we thought we were going to be. We thought we were going to be artists. And in that song particularly, it uses extraordinary different kinds of colors. So painting with a song was the idea for the song. Then the other idea, of course, was to make extraordinary sounds of my voice. And that's when I fell in love with the recording game. So Where You Love Like Heaven is a painter's kind of view, but also it speaks of the true idea of this box set was to represent what's called flower power. Flower power was to represent that you could wear your dreams in brilliant colors inside yourself. And really, for 2 wars and a depression, the male of our society when I was growing up had been hardened for battle. And it was a very tough thing being a teenager in the early 60s to actually show a young boy, to show sensitive feelings. You understand what I'm saying? And
yes.
So these songs of mine were starting to gather together in a box set. And some of the songs were definitely direct. The Way You Love Like Heaven was directly saying, hey, young guys, you don't have to hide this album under your bread because your mates are making fun of your gentle side. You are a male that can have a gentle side. And that was that song. What was that song was about? So Where You Love Like Heaven.
Color in sky, brush and blue, scarlet.
Voyage into the golden screen, and before it, Where Your Love Like Heaven. There will be more from Donovan and more from Gift from a Flower to a Garden a little later on in the show. So, A Gift from a Flower to a Garden, originally from 1967 and soon to be reissued, is our featured album. It is a delight, and I was delighted to catch up with Donovan recently to talk about it. Delighted to say that our featured album tonight is A Gift from a Flower to a Garden by Donovan, and Donovan is with me. We're going to play 3 more tracks now for this second section. Let's do it again in reverse order that the listeners will hear them. The third track we'll be playing in this section is Isle of Islay, or Islay, depending how you want to pronounce it. Now, was that somewhere you knew and loved?
Isle of Islay, yeah, it's a small island off the west of Scotland, and when I start talking about Scotland, my Scottish accent comes back. And I'm from Scotland, I'm the Irish in Glasgow. Billy Connolly and I have a good laugh when we ever get together. Anyway, it was a time when the pressure was of fame, and it's great at the top, of course, but Gypsy Dave and I, we realized that we need to get away. And so we got the train all the way up, and we got all the way to Logan Air, and we got on a wee plane, and they flew us up, and we flew over to the Isle of Islay, which is famous in ancient stories of Scotland. And as we got over the aerodrome, the sheep wouldn't let us land.
Wow.
And so the wee plane was only 6 seats, and Logan Air went down as close as it could while the sheep just spread out and disappeared, and we landed. And the local people, they kind of knew who I was, and they left us to ourselves to have a relaxing time. And it was walking the beaches and the cliffs of the Isle of Islay that I wrote the Isle of Islay.
Lovely. The Tinker and the Crab we will hear in the middle of this section. Tell us about the Tinker and the Crab, Donovan.
Well, just before I made that television appearance at 18 years of age and Ready, Steady, Go in 1965, Gypsy Dave and I had actually been bohemian ramblers, and we'd slept on the beaches down there in Cornwall. We'd enjoyed the life of the gypsies, and I really did. And when I actually was writing that song, it took me back of sleeping down there in those extraordinary Cornish coasts. And then one day when Gyp and I were there, over the dunes came a travelling man with a sack on his back and flowers in his hand. And that's where that comes from.
Wow.
And that's what that particularly is my very special one on the children's album, The Tinker and the Crab.
Lovely. And then we're going to begin now with one of my favourites, Little Boy in Corduroy. Tell me about this.
Well, it really is extraordinary how easily from a very early age, I could write sing-along songs. And the idea was to get the kids to start singing, even on the album, whether it was for their parents, to get them to start singing. The Little Boy in Corduroy, Little Girl in Lace. And this was a fabulous time. I didn't even have children yet, but I had been with families that had children, and so I wanted to celebrate. And the idea of all in a party, which always happened in Scotland whenever they were singing along, I thought I was brought up with that. So Little Boy in Corduroy was to celebrate those party gatherings that I used to have.
Little boy in corduroy, on the windy beach, the sun is shining through. The tinker and the crab, how high the gulls fly o'er Islay.
Isle of Islay, The Tinker and the Crab, and we started with Little Boy in Corduroy. There will be a couple more tracks from Donovan's lovely A Gift from a Flower to a Garden towards the end of the show. So we've been celebrating Donovan's A Gift from a Flower to a Garden. 1967 initially released. It will be out again on the 1st of December in a lovely new deluxe set. We're going to play a couple more tracks from it now, and here's Donovan to tell you a bit more about them. I'm talking to Donovan about Gift from a Flower to a Garden, which has been handsomely, beautifully remastered and re-released. A gorgeous record. So we'll hear two final selections from Donovan's A Gift from a Flower to a Garden now. Maybe we'll take them in the correct order now. Well, actually, no. The closing, the longest track is the closing track, and we'll hear that at the end. Epistle to Derroll. Tell me about that, Donovan.
Okay. Epistle, old world name for a letter. Each singer-songwriter that I met out of the folk blues area, they had a mentor. They had someone from the generation just before them. Now, Derroll himself was from the 50s, and in that group that he was in America included Pete Stuart, Woody Guthrie, and heroes of mine of the folk records that I'd listened to. But I found a more important thing with Derroll, that he actually imparted to me a very special way of touching the guitar with the fingers to get the picking. I'm famous for my picking now, and I have to say my mentor was Derroll. But the whole story tells of also my love when my father read him to me, Lewis Carroll, and then Non-Adequate Lear, and all of these fantasy Victorian early magic stories of this world that children are read to in those old days. And I fell into it straight away. And on the beach, I'm speaking, thinking how I could get in touch with Derroll, who I'd lost contact with. So this was a real letter to a real mentor on a recording, and it's a really long one. It's become very popular with children all over the world.
Oh, that's lovely. We'll hear that in a moment, Epistle to Derroll. You are justly famous for your fingerpicking, Donovan. You taught the Beatles how to fingerpick in Rishikesh, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, John actually, sitting in the jungle, only our acoustic guitars. I played all the time, so did they. And at one point he said, "How do you do that?" And I said, what? And he said, that finger picking, can you teach me? I said, it'll take a while. You know, it took me 3 days. And he said, I've got time here in the jungle. And so he learned that, and it opens up a new way of writing songs. And so the guitar picking is nothing new in our British, Irish, Scottish, Welsh islands, you know. This finger picking comes from the old troubadours' days, of course, and I learned it very well. Bert Jansch taught me some stuff too. That great Scottish English master of the guitar. So a big thing with Derroll, with picking, very big.
But before that, we're going to play another track that I very much like, Starfish on the Toast. Now, tell me about this.
Well, it's nonsense, isn't it? It's nonsense. The Edward Lear and love it. You know, fine rock pooling coast. This starfish on the toast. It's making fun of the language, but it's also making fun of how kids make fun of songs. And it's a flashback to that way of life that this album does. A way of life that I lived on those beaches. And other gypsies were there, other young boys and girls. And it's a sort of a life that I could never go back to, you understand?
Yes.
Since I became super famous around the world, walking unannounced onto a beach anywhere in the world now is difficult. So that song, Starfish on the Toast, echoes back to a time, a way of life that I would never see again.
And I must ask you, are you familiar with have you ever heard a record by Prince called Starfish and Coffee? Which Starfish and Coffee, maple syrup and jam. I think Prince definitely had heard Starfish on the Toast. I think he'd heard this. Oh, Donovan, it's so lovely to speak to you, and it's a wonderful record, and I'm so glad that we've been able to feature it, and it's getting hopefully introduced to a new generation, as you say, grandchildren maybe this time.
That's right. And also, to tell you the truth, it's a beautiful thing to touch, to feel. It's not cheap, of course, but in actual fact, you can pass it on and look after it and as an heirloom. And thank you, Stuart, for making me a Record of the Week.
Epistle to Derroll, and before it's Starfish on the Toast, which I think Prince has definitely heard. Thank you so much to Donovan. A Gift from a Flower to a Garden is reissued on the 1st of December.